Hey folks, we are back again, and this time we have the other half of the Smith and Sniff duo. We have Mr. Sniff himself, the wonderful Richard Porter, known for Sniffpetrol, for Smith and Sniff, former Top Gear script editor and current Grand Tour script editor. So he is going to be an interesting chap to pick the brains of. Hello, Richard. How are you?
Hello. I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm not doing too bad. So I'm going to start with our first question, which is always our first question, which is why cars? Why are you interested in cars?
Oh, I suppose my dad. That's probably quite a stock answer, isn't it? But my dad was an engineer and had a really keen appreciation of mechanical things and really liked cars and motorbikes, which he didn't hand on to me particularly. But he he used to buy Car Magazine, and then I would be caught sort of rifling through his briefcase from work trying to find the latest copy of Car Magazine. And I think he probably slightly lost interest in cars later, and it was me that had the subscription to Car, and he would sort of thumb through it a bit with increasing disinterest. But it was too late. It had happened, and I think my parents used to tell a story about. I mean, I would sound like a horrible smart-ass child, and obviously they've grown into a horrible smart-ass adult, but I used to sit in the back of the car. My mum had a Mini when I was little, and apparently I would sit in the back of it, and she would go, "Oh, look, there's a new Ford Escort." And I'd go, "No, that's not an Escort, Mummy. The Escorts don't have mirrors like that." Or, "No, the headlights are completely wrong," and just be intolerable for entire car journeys. And that, but if I'm going to blame somebody, I think it's got to be my dad.
Sounds like you're an early form of internet pedant for what car you're looking at. I often get told off that I'm talking about precisely the wrong model.
Completely.
Yeah. So, what was your first car? What did you end up driving?
My first car. My first car was a Ford Ka, because I was a student, and I didn't have a car then because I'd started saving up for a car when I was sort of 15, and I really wanted a 2CV. I can't remember why. I mean, I really liked 2CVs, but for some reason I decided I was going to have a 2CV, and I think I had a little box or something with 2CV fund written on it, which I put money into from earning. I used to have like a job where I'd mow people's lawns, and I used to wash people's cars and stuff like that. And so I started putting money into that. And I think I blew it on a mountain bike instead before I'd learnt to drive. So that was the end of the 2CV fund. And then I was a student, and I didn't have any money, and I didn't really need a car. So I was quite late to getting a car. I don't think I bought a car until I was 23. It seems quite late, actually. That's a bit embarrassing to admit, in a way, for a car person. But I think it was partly because I didn't want a crap car, and so I sort of held out. And then by the time I was 23, I had been working for a little bit, albeit sort of just working in a shop, just doing something to earn money. And I got a bit of money put aside, and I got a bit of money that was squirreled away that my grandparents had left me in their will, that my parents had. And they went, when I got a new job, I got my first sort of inverted commas proper job, and I needed a car because I was moving away to Birmingham. And so we pooled the money my parents had got and everything that I'd got, and I bought a year-old Ford Ka, because all of the car magazines said it was the best handling small car since the original Mini, or some kind of hyperbole like that. And that was good enough for me. And even to the point where I sought out, if you remember when the Ka came out, you could have it, the base model didn't have power steering, and then the Ka 2, as it was at the time, the sort of up-spec one, did. And I made sure I sought out a base model with no power steering, because John Simister in Car Magazine had said that it had better steering feel in the non-pass one. And as a side effect, which I only discovered when I got it, is that the ones with power steering had shorter gearing because they wanted them to feel lively, and the power steering was quite quick, and so they wanted it shorter geared. It just sort of matched the whole feel of the car. But the longer gearing in the non-pass one meant it was faster on the motorway. Like, you could really ring it out, and fifth was taller, so you could smoke off, albeit sort of with a differential of about 3 miles an hour, other cars on the motorway, and that was a sort of small moment of delight. But that was my first car, and it does feel for a car nerd a little bit like I wasn't trying hard enough, because I should have had some old crap. But I'm not. The problem is I'm not very good at mending things, which is the bit that my dad didn't hand down to me, because he was brilliant at mending stuff. And also, I think it's generational. He came from a generation that had to fix things, because it's sort of, they came out of the Second World War, and you couldn't just throw away your kettle because it was broken. You'd fix it, you'd replace the element or something like that. And so my dad was from that generation. Plus, he was an engineer, and he just knew how to mend stuff and build stuff. And he tried to teach me, but it didn't stick somehow. It stuck to my brother. My brother is incredibly good at doing things like that. He sort of builds stuff. And I'm always like, well, how do you do that? And he went, well, it's almost like he can't understand how you couldn't know how to, put up a stud wall or something. And I wouldn't have the first clue. So I didn't ever want a car that I had to fiddle with a lot, because I can do the basics. I could change the oil and change the plugs and all that sort of malarkey. But I don't have the confidence to take a cylinder head off and know that it would go back on without there being some kind of horrific gasket problem. So that's why I'm a chicken, and I got a reasonably new car as my first car, because I sort of needed it to be reliable, because I did a lot of driving around in it. It's like I was a bloke I worked with in that job he was very, very mechanically minded and good at that sort of stuff. And we were having lunch one day, and he went, when you take the engine out of your car, and I went, no. What do you mean, why would I? Mr. Ford put it in there. Why would I take it out again? It's like saying, when you take your teeth out, no. There are people qualified to do that, and I'm not one of them. Why would you do that to yourself? But he would take engines out of cars almost for fun.
Yeah, I'm weirdly, my dad was kind of the same way. He had loads of somewhat knackered old cars when we were growing up, and would just constantly be tinkering and fiddling and swapping engines in minis and all this kind of stuff. And none of that rubbed off on me. But I did get the desire to own cars and have interesting cars and stuff. And have a confession, podcast listeners, and I'm confessing it to Richard here. I have never done an oil change in a car. However, I will back that up by saying currently I am halfway through taking the engine in my Porsche 996 to pieces. So I'm totally not mechanically minded, but I have never done an oil change.
Oh my God. The idea of, I don't know, maybe you find this as well, that because I do and have done repairs on cars. Because the funny thing is that though my very first car was only a year old, I have subsequently owned much older stuff and much crapper stuff, and had to do repairs. But when they work, it fills me with such an extraordinary sense of joy and, quite honestly, disbelief that in a way I'm sort of elated. On the other hand, I can't relax because I can't believe that it's actually that whatever I've done has worked, and that in some way it's going to catastrophically fail. It's why I sort of almost colour code where I'm allowed or allowing myself to work on a car. So in the red zone of no, not at all would be brakes or something like that, because I just don't trust myself to have. And plus, I know plenty of people who are quite mechanically minded and able to work on cars who have nonetheless still royally screwed up, and they tend to tell these stories in such a casual way. They'll go, so anyway, yeah, I was on the M1 and I had complete brake failure. And you just go, that doesn't sound like, that's not a fun anecdote. You could have killed someone or yourself. It's like, and I just wouldn't trust myself to mend brakes on a car. But I'd have a crack at some other stuff. But it's even things like, I had a Jeep Cherokee a while ago, I just kind of fancied one. I needed a sort of roomy-ish car to haul the dog around in, and I bought a Jeep Cherokee for £800, which, funnily enough, the previous owner proudly told me, the guy I bought it off, he went, "Oh, I've overhauled all the brakes," and he said it with such confidence. So I just went, "Great," and actually the brakes on that car were never quite right, so I shouldn't have trusted him. But anyway, the tailgate, one of the tailgate struts, the gas struts, broke, and then the tailgate wouldn't stay up. And I was going to replace the strut. I mean, that's an easy enough job. But then I thought, actually, those gas struts, they're incredibly powerful. I'm going to lose an eye. I'll take my own eye out with this. I can feel it. I'll do something, and I'll just be an absolute arsewit, and that's it. Or it'll go through my ear or something. I kind of went, do I really need to do this? And so in the end I didn't. I just used to have to stand there trying to coax the dog in the back while holding the tailgate with one hand, or resting it on my head if I needed two hands. It was a bit pathetic.
You need the old car bit of wood, which all old cars must have at all times, is a bit of wood, because it's useful for many things, including holding tailgates open. So I thoroughly recommend any older vehicles, requisition yourself a piece of wood for holding tailgates and stopping the car rolling down a hill and all sorts of other useful tools.
It's funny because I do remember once taking the dog to some woods in the Cherokee after the tailgate strut had broken, and seeing a really sturdy sort of 6 foot long bit of wood just lying on the ground, and briefly thinking, I could take that, and that could be the tailgate prop for my car. And then I just went, no, I can't. Somehow I can't do it, because it'd need to be substantially sized, and then it would have to sort of it would poke over the back seats, and also the dog would probably chew it. So yeah, I chickened out.
They're a useful extra tool to have. So you are a man of many hats, one might say. You write for Evo still, I believe. You script edit on Grand Tour. You do podcasts with our friend Johnny Smith, and the videos and all of that kind of stuff. Where did it all start? Like, what is your entry into where you are now? I'm assuming at some point you were just a young journalist looking to find their way. How did this all come about?
Yeah, I suppose I was. I did journalism at university, so I guess that's where I wanted to be, in some sort of media kind of job. But then when I left university, I just worked in a shop for ages because I couldn't get the kind of job that I really wanted, and I was just folding jumpers, running the stockroom in a small branch of Next, which was interesting. Actually, no, it wasn't interesting. That was the problem. It wasn't very interesting. It's not that interesting to fold jumpers. So I got my lucky break on the old version of Top Gear in 1998 because John Bentley, who people might know as the presenter of the Gadget Show these days, John was the series editor, I think he was officially called, on old Top Gear when it was a half-hour Thursday night show. And he broke a load of BBC rules by popping up at the end of the programme one night and going, "We're looking for researchers, send in 3 ideas and your CV." And you weren't supposed to do that, and because the BBC had rules about how you actually advertise jobs, and they sort of belatedly had to put an advert in the Media Guardian to comply with the actual protocols of advertising a job formally in the correct places. But I wrote in, and I didn't hear anything for ages, because the other problem they had with advertising it at the end of the programme, which was in those days was sort of kind of still at the height of its powers in that format, because it still had Clarkson on it and Quentin Wilson and Tiff and Vicky, and it was getting, I can't remember the audience. It was the audience figures were pretty solid, sort of 3 or 4 million at least, maybe a bit more, and so they got quite a few applications, and it took them a while to sift through them. So I didn't hear anything for months, and I assumed, because I was applying for jobs all the time and not hearing back, that this was just another job I hadn't got. And then finally I got a letter inviting me for an interview. And when I went for the interview, which was with John Bentley and a guy called John Wilcox, who was the other producer on the show, I was wearing the same tie as John Bentley. I think it was sort of on that basis that I got the job, because he found it amusing that I got the same tie on as him. But you know what they say about always make yourself memorable in a job interview? And it's like, well, wearing the same tie as the senior man in the room was a pretty good way of doing it. So that was, and I got a job as a junior researcher on what was Top Gear. Actually, my first job wasn't on Top Gear; it was on The Car's the Star. If you remember those sort of little 20-minute shows on that Quentin Wilson fronted, and that was a great show to work on. And my job title was junior researcher, which is obviously just looking up stuff and fact checking and all that kind of thing. But Pebble Mill in those days it had a very nice sort of laid back feel to it, and they let you just have a go at stuff. There was none of the sort of you must stay in your lane, you must do exactly what your job description says. It was a bit more, oh, you're right, you wanted to have a go at directing something? Yeah, you could probably have a go at that. And in my case, they said I'd done a load of research on the first Cars the Star I worked on was about the larder. And they used to shoot Cars the Star in the summer when Top Gear was on its break. And but we weren't filming anything for a couple of months, maybe. So I did all the research. I got loads and loads of research, and then I had nothing much to do. And they said, "Do you want to just sort of try putting this into a script?" And I had no experience of writing scripts. I think they said, "Look, here's a load of previous scripts." So at least I had a vague idea of how to format it. But then the thing is, I had a sort of, I don't know, 3 weeks, maybe a month, to just keep fiddling around with this, finessing it, until finally I showed it to the producer of the series, and he sent it to Quentin Wilson. And then Quentin came in for a meeting, and he went, I think he said something like, he said, "Did you write this?" And I said, "Yeah." And he went, "It's very good." And I went, "Oh, thanks." And that was it. I mean, as far as I was concerned, that was like, he's a bloke off the telly. And the thing is, Quentin has throughout my career, particularly in those early days, was hugely supportive and always had my back. And it was without that, I think I wouldn't have sort of had the confidence to keep writing and trying to make that kind of what I did for a living. But it was entirely luck and circumstance and just blundering into this job, and then having it happened to be at a time when they weren't filming, so I had a bit of time to just sort of faff about and try and write a script and polish it. And I think with writing that there is no harm in rewriting again, and that's what I did. So it was sort of acceptable enough that, and we went away and we filmed the Larder show, and it was substantially the script that I'd written. So as far as I was concerned, it was like, holy crap, this is what I want to do. And then I kept on doing it, and then in fact it saves my arse, because there were 4 of us were hired in that intake of researchers from the original John Bentley call out on the telly, and we were all people who'd never worked in TV before, were just super enthusiastic kind of car people, and that was what John Bentley wanted. He wanted some fresh blood. But then there's sort of arcane BBC rules about how staff are used, because in those days we were all signed on. We were staffers rather than freelancers, as we would be now. And after a while, someone in HR went, "Well, these 4 researchers, you've had them on Top Gear for ages. They've worked too long on one show. Our policy is we move people around when they're quite junior to get them more experience," which is really sensible in a way. But when you've all signed up to work on a show that you absolutely love and that you're passionate about, because it's on a subject that you're passionate about, it was a bit of a kick in the teeth in a way. And what actually happened was that I think John Bentley couldn't save all our skins, and he had to accept that the other guys were going to get moved around. But he managed to keep me on the show, because he said, "Oh no, I can't lose Richard, because he also writes scripts. He's not a researcher. He also writes the scripts." Which I think even probably now they'd go, "Well, hang on a minute. He's not. That's breaking rules. He's not supposed to do that." Even though loads of people in telly write scripts, it's just that there's sometimes there are guidelines and rules about this. They probably go, "Oh, he can't write scripts because we'd have to pay him more," would be the main problem. But in those days, John just basically went, "Look, no, you can't take him. I need him." And he was the one, possibly with some input from Quentin as well. I got saved, so I got to stay on Top Gear for a bit longer. And then John left.
A lot longer, surely, at this point.
Well, yeah, there was a bit of a gap because that's the thing. John left, or John got moved. I think that's the thing. Even he was like sort of having Dumbledore on your side because he knew how to work the system and he was very powerful. But he, I think, couldn't save his own skin because the Beeb at that point was going through one of its many periods of upheaval, and they wanted to move people around. I think I don't know what happened to John in the end. He got shifted onto another show or something, or he decided to leave altogether. But he wasn't there. We got a new producer. The show started going to cock, I felt. I mean, the new producer was quite well-meaning, but she didn't have a real feel for the show, and she used to say things like, I've got an idea. Why don't we do a test of motorway service station sandwiches? But she didn't mean it. I mean, that's quite a funny idea if you were going to dick around. I could imagine us doing that on the Top Gear iteration, sort of from 2002 onwards. But she meant it seriously. She meant it as a piece of consumer journalism, and we all just went, who's going to watch that? That's dog shit. And so I bailed out after a bit. I thought, I don't like this. I don't like the way it's going. It's all a bit strange. So yeah, I left and did some other stuff. And only then went back when Top Gear reformed in 2002. So I had a couple of years doing other things, and then went back. So it wasn't sort of continuity between me getting my first job and then the sort of reinvention of the show in the early 2000s.
So were you part of that reinvention team? I'm guessing that sort of. Cause I'm trying to remember exactly what happened. I remember it kind of went off the air and then came back with a bit of a fanfare that. It got pulled, but not cancelled. I think they sort of. I seem to remember. I might be maligning the people at the Beeb who did this, but I'm pretty sure there was like a statement with an absolutely howlingly clunky kind of Top Gear has just been parked for a while kind of nonsense in it, because they didn't want to say it's been cancelled. I think it might have been after they'd already got it in the neck for cancelling One Man and His Dog, and they were already a bit sensitive at this idea that they were, willfully throwing away beloved titles. So they said officially it was resting, but I think if Jeremy hadn't come along and said to a lady called Jane Root, who was running BBC Two at the time, I've got this idea how I'd like to bring Top Gear back, then it probably would have stayed rested for a while. Because if you remember, it sort of got parked in inverted commas, and a lot of the presenting team went to Channel 5 and did Fifth Gear. Yeah.
Because that original gang that jumped ship was Quentin, Vicky, Tiff, Adrian Simpson. I can't remember if John Bentley was popping up on the screen at that point. He might have been on Fifth Gear. So they'd sort of they effectively paused the show, and but it wasn't that long a gap, I think, until then. Jeremy had approached them and said, "Look, I think I might have an idea for how to bring Top Gear back," and so that just around that time, and I didn't know that this was happening. It might have been before he'd gone to the Beeb with that. He had seen Sniffpetrol, my website, because I'd gone away to do some other stuff, and then I'd been working for a place that had gone bust, and so I'd become freelance by accident. And I was bored and I had no work, and I had some free web space with a new broadband provider, and I started doing Sniffpetrol, and he had seen it. He was quite an early discoverer of the site, and he didn't know it was me because I didn't put my name on it for ages when I set it up. But he sent me an email to the contact address on the webpage, and it was classic Jeremy, because the title of the email in capital letters was "Read this," and he just went, "Your website's very, very funny. Give me a ring," and put his home number on the bottom of it. It seems like a strange thing to do now, but so of course I rang him and went. Well, in fact, no. Then there was a follow-up email where he accused me of being someone else, a mutual friend of ours, that he thought the penny had dropped. He thought he knew who was behind it. And he just sent me a follow-up email that said, with this person's name, "I know it's you," and then used the C-bomb in an affectionate way.
Yeah.
So I rang him and went, "Hello, Jeremy. You've just called me it's not who you think it is. It's me. Remember me from Pebble Mill?" because when I started working on Old Top Gear, Jeremy was there for another few months before he quit. He suddenly had this moment of realization that he felt he'd taken it as far as he could, and he handed in his notice from the presentation team. So we did know each other a little bit, but not well. And so he knew who I was, and we had a long phone chat. And he just went, "I really like your website. I think I'm going to mention it in my Sun column or something because it's brilliant and more people should see it. All right. Anyway, take care. Bye." And that was it. And a few months later, I went to a car industry sort of lunch thing, which was weird because I never normally went to those kind of things. But I got invited by somebody who I think also found out that I was doing Sniffpetrol and kind of just wanted to, show off that they knew who I was by bringing me to this lunch. And Jeremy turned up. And we ended up sharing a cab back to Paddington Station, during which he gave me the sort of Blues Brothers were reforming the band speech about bringing Top Gear back. And he went, I'm doing it with Andy Willman, who I also sort of knew from Pebble Mill. Come in for a chat. And so I did. I went to see them for a proper sit-down chat. And they went, right, between us, this is what we're going to do. It's going to be based in a studio. And I went, what, a car show in a studio? Oh, okay, that's not, all right, yeah. And we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And we think we might have a racing driver who never speaks. And I was like, really? Oh. And I was thinking, these ideas are insane. What the bloody hell's wrong with them? But there was enough that they did propose that I thought was quite good. And it's just also, between them, Jeremy and Andy, they are the kind of people who have a sort of infectious enthusiasm for stuff. When they've got something they want to do, they just sort of have that kind of the pair of personalities that they make you believe it's going to be the best thing in the world. And so I went, yeah, count me in. It's fine. And they didn't. I didn't even offer me a job, like a specific job. They just went, we want you to work on the show because we've seen your website, and that's exactly the sort of tone and the humour that we want in the show. So we want you to be involved in the show. And I don't think I had a job title until we'd started filming, and they suddenly went. In fact, the first show, the very first episode of that new format of Top Gear, I think I'm credited as script supervisor, which is actually an entirely different job. I mean, that is a genuine job in TV, but that is a very different job. That's somebody who tends to sit in the gallery of a studio show, and they are working across the script to make sure that the director knows all the shots that are required, and they're counting in music and doing all sorts of very clever technical things. And it's a brilliant and very skilled job, and absolutely one that I'm not qualified to do. So after the first episode, I went, I don't think I am a script supervisor. But Jeremy thought it was hilariously funny because he didn't realise that script supervisor job, and he just imagined that I stood there in a brown store coat with a clipboard supervising the words that were sort of going into the machine. He went, "No, you are the script supervisor because you should wear a flat cap and have a cigarette behind your ear. You're supervising the factory of script." And I was like, "No, I don't think I can be that." So I was sort of retrospectively given the title script editor because it was probably as close, to what I actually did. But it was. Sorry, to answer your question that you asked about 10 hours ago, I was sort of involved in the reinvention of the show, but only in the later stages of the planning because they already had the bones of it. Jeremy and Andy had already been thinking about it a lot, but I got to be involved in things like the screen testing of presenters. So we did a load of screen tests, and I remember when Richard Hammond turned up, and I'd met Richard before because I screen tested him for a job on Old Top Gear, which we ended up giving to Adrian Simpson. And when Richard turned up at his screen test for the new Top Gear, I said, "Oh yeah, we went before, haven't we? Oh yes, we have." And I was like, "Yeah, sorry, but you didn't get the job." Yeah, I mean, you no idea how close you came. It was between you and Adrian. We almost gave it to you, and I was rooting for you actually. And he just went, "Oh, don't tell me that." It's like he didn't want to know how perilously close he'd come to his dream job. But then I was able to root for him again. And I remember because we'd had a day of screen testing various people, and we'd seen some really good people, but they just weren't quite hitting the spot somehow. It's one of those things, when you don't know what you want, but you'll know it when you see it. And he was the first person that we sort of went, I think he's got to. I remember he turned up, he had a left-hand drive, mid-80s Porsche 911. Because he really wanted a 911, but he couldn't afford a right-hand drive one. You remember left-hand drive ones used to be quite a lot cheaper, particularly back then. And
no, 2002
it was a little,
that'd been,
and it was a sort of 85 car, I think, and
Yeah.
and I remember watching him drive away. Jeremy and I standing in the loading dock of the little studio where we'd done the screen tests, and watching him drive away, having a cigarette, and Jeremy just going, "I liked him. I liked him a lot," and that was Hammond. That was how we ended up with Hammond, and that was the same day we had Jason Dorr as well. Or it might have been the next day, I forget now. But Jason Dorr was the original presenter, and again, we were just like, this guy's got something, no TV experience at all, but he got a good patter because he was a car salesman turned car sales trainer, and he just had something. I mean, it didn't quite work out with Jason, and I think that was our fault, really, because he didn't have any telly experience, and we should have realised that. But everybody was so frantic just trying to make the show, which, some weeks it felt like we weren't going to make it on air because it was so shambolic, that we didn't really have any spare brain space or time to go, this bloke probably needs a bit more support because he's been plucked from his old job and told you're going on national TV. And that's a tricky one. Richard had done telly before, but it's a hard job just to show up. And in those days, they had earpieces as well. And that's, I mean, it's an underrated skill. And actually, Jeremy and James, during the making of that era of Top Gear, didn't have earpieces because they just found them annoying and distracting. Richard did. But Jason said, yeah, I'll take an earpiece. So, you can hear, either you have it constantly just hearing the chatter in the gallery, which Richard does, which is extraordinary. You can just hear all manner of bollocks being talked while you're trying to talk to the camera. And if you're not comfortable with that, you can have what they called key talkback, where someone has to press a button to talk to you. But even so, you can be kind of in the middle of something, and the director will just go, "Sorry, mate, just move slightly to the left while you're talking." And you've got to not break stride. And sometimes you can see it in presenters. You can see where their eyes go a little bit glassy, and you're like, "Oh, somebody's just spoken to them from the gallery." I mean, very rarely, because just imagine how distracted it is if you're trying to have a conversation with somebody and then somebody else is whispering in your ear, telling you to do things. You've always got to split your brain in half to be able to deal with it. And the really good TV presenters like Hammond can do it effortlessly. But we sort of expected Jason to be able to do it, and he did it pretty well considering that he had no experience there. But that was my kind of the point at which I arrived. At the show, we were casting presenters, and we were working out some of the details, and there were sort of lots of stuff that we just sort of blithered into, lots of ideas that we came up with we thought were hilarious, and then we dropped. There was one that I really liked, but it was just too much work for very little reward, really, was that every week the theme tune at the end would be played by a different kind of band live in the studio. So there'd be the thank you, good night, and then there'd be like a school recorder choir one week, or a bagpipe band, or like a full orchestra or something would do the theme tune to the show to play us out. It was it's got kind of a Chris Evansy sort of idea, and we really liked it for ages. And then we just went, this is basically a full-time job for somebody to find these different kinds of bands and musicians and then help them to learn the theme tune. For what? For the end of the programme. They get faded out after 30 seconds. The effort to reward ratio is way out of whack there. Which
the thing is, nowadays, that the way the world has gone, you could actually crowdsource that and not have to worry about it. But I'm guessing back in the early 2000s, that was much of a...
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. We probably couldn't we? Because we could just get people to film it on their phones when they'd done it. But back then it was like, we're not going to get with the studio. There'll be an area of the studio where they could do it. It's like, actually, this is a dumb idea. So
full-time band wrangler.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I mean, that's shows that have musicians and music on do have music people, and we didn't because we weren't a music show. So there's all manner of idiocy that came up in those days. I mean, that's the thing, and we really sort of twisted our heads about how to within the basic idea that Jeremy had come up with, which is it's a car show that's based in a studio and there's this and that. But then it's amazing. It sounds ridiculous because it's not bloody brain surgery, but at the same time, the amount of effort that goes into any TV show to sort of the small details. Absurd things. They did a great parody of this on that recent Alan Partridge series, which is they did this thing where sometimes he's talking as he's moving across the set, and he hasn't got enough words to cover the amount of distance he's got to walk. And it's probably one of those things that's only funny if you've ever worked on a TV show where you've had that problem, that sometimes just the pure mechanics of moving a TV presenter around in a natural way, which we used to struggle with on Top Gear a lot, that sort of, okay, you're going to finish this talking about this Rolls Royce here, but then you need to be over here to introduce this film about this Porsche. So you've got to walk across the studio, and you have to write enough words to cover the walk, but not so many that it's hard to remember while you're walking and talking, because we didn't have auto cue. And all of those little sort of things on a weekly basis, we were going, oh, bloody hell. We've totally screwed up here in some way or other. We've got too many things with Jeremy in them, and like Richard doesn't appear, which actually used to happen in the first series with Jason, because they did these worldwide edits for showing on TV stations that were shown outside the UK on BBC worldwide, and they used to do this brutal half-an-hour edit of an hour-long program where they just used to sort of take an axe to the tape and just slash it, and it was extraordinary. And I didn't, like, no one, we didn't. It was done outside of our office. We didn't realise this, how bad they were, until I was on holiday and I flicked on the TV and it was an episode of Top Gear, and I was like, oh bloody hell, this is my show. And then suddenly there was a sort of clunky cut in it. I was like, wait a minute, what have they done? Why have they done this? And I realised it was the half-hour edit, and I kept watching it to see what else had happened. And Jason didn't show up in it at all until the very end when he said goodnight. So he just looked like a competition winner, because it basically, Jeremy just went, okay, that's it for Top Gear, goodbye. Wide shot, crane shot, pulls out, and there's Jason standing with Richard and Jeremy waving, and you're just like, who's that big lad who's waving goodbye? Has he like won a prize or something? It's so strange. They just cut him out, which seems a little unfair. So
I enjoy looking for editing choices on television in that manner, like when you've got a film and you try and fathom the thought process of why they put the ad break at that exact point. My God, building up tension, and ads.
I do sometimes wonder if there's actually just a sort of a stipulation. They just say, right, the ad breaks should be roughly around these times, and someone very, very bored just spools through and goes, oh, we need one at 40 minutes. There you go. And it doesn't matter if it's, do you expect me to talk? No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to buy Persil laundry tablets. They're fantastically ham-fisted.
It's a sort of a fine art in and of itself. I quite enjoy it nowadays. So I want to go back a little bit. So you've written a bunch about your time at Top Gear. You have an actual book that's actually available in the real world, and people should buy it and read it to find out more about Top Gear. I have some more questions that do relate a little bit to it, but I want to go back a little bit to Sniffpetrol, because that's where I first came across your work. It was kind of like a car version of TV Go Home, as far as I was concerned, which was, if you don't know, not you, Richard, but people listening, it's Charlie Brooker's website, where he got picked up to then become a writer for doing other comedy stuff. And it was like a fake TV Times listing thing. And it was called TV Go Home. And out of that came Nathan Barley, which had a very different name in TV Go Home. And in fact, it's already been referenced once on this podcast. But Richard Porter's Sniffpetrol, or just Sniffpetrol as it was back then, was kind of in a similar vein. So where did that come from? Like, how did you decide that you got the web space and you're going to do a car thing, but you went for a kind of satirical Onion-esque, TV Go Home-esque angle on it? Why?
Why? Yeah, that's a good question. Well, it's funny you mentioned TV Go Home, because that was one of the inspirations for it, completely and utterly. And the other one was The Onion. And it was, I don't know, I suppose it was just that there seemed to be nothing there in the kind of car and motorsport world that was taking the piss. And so it felt like there was a small gap there that I could slide into. And if I'm honest, I also just thought I had seen what had happened to Charlie Brooker. because I used to love TV Go Home and all that stuff. You know, the thing you just mentioned with the rude word that was the Nathan Barley thing, and Fozzie Bear's I Steadfod of Doom. Yes, yeah. All that stuff is so good. And I thought, I mean, that's the thing. The problem with starting Sniffpetrol was I did have a moment of doubt where I just thought cars aren't inherently funny. Television, it's easy to just sort of twist things. Well, easy. I say it's not easy. It's easy to twist things. It's hard to twist them as well as Charlie Brooker does because he's brilliant. But I felt like it's somehow there is a way in which you can twist. I don't know. Sort of documentary formats to make them seem more absurd because they're already a bit absurd sometimes. Whereas there's nothing absurd per se about, say, the Toyota Carina E. It's just a car. So how do you make it funny? Motorsport's a little bit easier because it's, some of the people are slightly absurd and you can kind of run with that and seize on characteristics. I used to love it. I kind of still do when someone sort of visibly crap enters F1 because you just go, oh, brilliant. Oh, great. Oh, I hope Pastor Maldonado's around next season because he is solid material all the way.
Comedy gold.
Yeah, well, it is, because that's the thing. I mean, it's shamelessly sort of playing to the gallery. You just pick on the shit ones is a standard sort of technique, well, standard technique on Sniffpetrol was anyway. But the reason, the part of the reason why I thought it was worth having a shot at it was because of Charlie Brooker and seeing how TV Go Home had led to other things for him. And I thought, bearing in mind that I'd just been made redundant / gone freelance, I thought this might be a shop window for getting me work. And I suppose in that way it did work because it was Jeremy seeing Sniffpetrol that prompted him to ask me to join the reinvented Top Gear. And over the years I've got quite a lot of work off the back of it. What's interesting is actually Jeremy and Andy Willman were the only people, because around that time it had started to get a bit of attention, and I had a 2 or 3 magazine editors getting in touch and going, we'd sort of like you to do Sniffpetrol in our magazine, but not Sniffpetrol because it's a bit rude and we don't want to upset people too much because obviously we've got to have a relationship. If you're quite brutal on, say, BMW or Nissan, and we wouldn't want to go that far. But maybe it wouldn't work if you don't go that far. And so that's the thing, we couldn't ever figure it out. And only Andy and Jeremy were savvy enough to go, look, we don't want exactly the website. We want the brain that made that website to apply itself to our format because it's clear that we like the way that brain works. And so they took a sort of more, a broader view, if you like, of it, which is how I ended up.
The tone rather than the content.
Exactly, yeah, that's it. Yeah, they could sort of see beyond that, which I guess, but it's also because it's a bit different doing the telly thing to a magazine thing. But so that's why I set it up. It's just mostly boredom and unemployment melded with, I think this might be a good way to sort of have a showcase of what I can do, but also it was just because I was shamelessly ripping off The Onion and the spirit of TV Go Home.
It worked wonderfully well. So what was your favourite running gag on Sniffpetrol, or your favourite advert? I used to always like the little mock adverts.
Yeah, I know. They always used to get really good response. I mean, I loved the running series of MG Rover adverts. There was sort of,
yes.
I think part of the reason why people seem to like them, and I think they conform to a thing that I've noticed often was behind the most effective mock ads and stories on Sniffpetrol, which is they were rooted in reality, which was that when MG Rover had relaunched the MG name on those Z saloons and hatchbacks, their ads were sort of deliberately a bit punchy, and they used to get in trouble with the ASA a little bit. And it was just taking that and sort of amping it up to an absurd degree to a place where they could never go, which is full of swearing and I can't remember. I might have. They were quite puerile in retrospect, but I think there might have been one of them that sort of went like the MGZT. It's wiped its knob on your curtains or something like that. I mean, they were just but they were supposed to be what would happen if MG absolutely just lost their minds and really went for it, like really wanted to annoy the ASA, and they always used to go down really well. And I did quite a few. I did so many of them. I think in the end that there was an MG Rover. Fans forum, and the guy who ran that with permission made them into a charity calendar, which has actually turned out to be a complete pain in the arse for him, because he went, could I have the high res pictures of them? And I went, there aren't any high res pictures, they're really low res because they're only for a website. And he had to remake all of them because they all use press photos. And so he had to rebuild them all from scratch, like matching the fonts and stuff. So it was a load of work for him to. But I think the calendar did all right, raised the money for charity, and it was quite a nice thing to do. But in the dying days of MG Rover, they'd really sort of cottoned onto this, and unofficially they kind of, I was told that when a new Sniffpetrol came out with one of their ads in, it would always sort of spread like wildfire through the offices at Longbridge. Everyone was sort of quite pleased with them, and it ended up with the PR guy inviting me up to Longbridge to have a look round. He told me afterwards. I still know this guy, and he told me afterwards I was the last journalist to be officially invited to Longbridge before the place collapsed. So I think that was March 2005. And while I was there, it was really weird because he went, I've got something I want to show you. This is our forthcoming ad campaign for the Rover 25. Just thought you might want a little sneak preview of it, see if it, gets your imagination going. And basically, they were feeding me the real ad so that I could take the piss out of them, or make them ridiculous, which was really nice, but a bit odd at the same time. I kind of felt it was a bit. If the manufacturer that I'm sort of taking the mick out of is on side, it doesn't feel like that's right somehow. There has to be this kind of tension between the two. But yeah, they and then someone also told me that there was a period when they were, again towards the end, they were doing a new campaign for, I think, the MGZT, and they wanted to try and reposition that car as a bit more sophisticated, a bit less leery. And in marketing meetings, it was said, I think we need the advertising to be a bit less Sniff Petrol, and that I was really pleased about. It's like if you become a reference for something, you just go, well, that's quite nice, isn't it? You become part of their internal lexicon. So I used to enjoy those, and one that always people seem to like, and it's taken on a kind of sad tone in retrospect, was there was a picture of Michael and Ralph Schumacher where it looks like Michael is sort of hissing something. He's got this grimace on his face, like he's sort of angry a little bit with his younger brother, and Ralph's face is just sort of slightly crestfallen. And I used to caption that, and that became a weekly gag. And whenever one of them changed teams, I'd have to spend bloody hours in Photoshop, which I'm not very good at, trying to change the uniform they were wearing so it looked like they were in their current team colours. It was really stupid, but it sort of felt like it was worth it because people liked them. And they were always just captioned something like, it was always supposed to be whatever Michael was saying was the caption, so it'd be things like, Dad told me I was always his favourite, and stuff like that. And it that ran for, well, I reckon I had to change their clothes at least 3 times, maybe 4, because I think Schumacher Senior went to Ferrari during that time, and Ralph, well, I mean, he was BMW and Toyota and all sorts of things. So yeah, those went down well. They were always good fun to do, because after a while, when you've done a running gag, it becomes a challenge to think of new lines.
Yeah, that's got to be a thing. People want more, and you may not either have a quality line for it or any idea of what to do next. So I can imagine ongoing gags must become quite a challenge.
Well, plus with something like that, there's a sort of economy of words, because there's only a little gap underneath the picture as the way I formatted it to fit in. So you can't do something very long. And also, I think that's the kind of gag doesn't work with a long thing. They need to be pretty short and punchy. And that's the thing. And I am, shameless tart when it comes to sort of giving people more of something that they appear to like. So I was like, oh, you, it's proper Sally Field stuff. You like me, you really like me. So I was like, okay, yeah, I'll just do more Schumacher stuff because that seems to be popular, and I'll do more MT Rover ads because they're popular. But so yeah, I think. But also they were fun to do. That's the thing. Like I said, the more you do something that's a running gag, and that particularly if you sense that people actually enjoy it, then there's an expectation that you've got to keep the quality up as best you can. So it's a good challenge to have. They're sort of nice challenges. It's not like it doesn't become too much of an arse-ache.
It keeps you on your toes, keeps you working as well.
Yeah, that's it. It keeps the brain ticking over. Yeah, it's one of the best things is to sort of feel like there's a bar somewhere that you have to hit, even though I think in a lot of, if you're writing It's Wiped Its Knob on Your Curtains, I grant you the bar isn't very high, but even so, it's worth striving for something better.
I think my favourite one of those was one, I think it just said, "You want some?" on the MG.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah. Oh no, I'm just laughing at my own gag. Sorry.
Yeah,
I'd forgotten
I'd
done that one.
Yeah, I think but also they could almost have run with that. Like, I think that they'd have probably sold more cars.
Was it actually? It might have had the F word in there. I can't remember.
Oh yeah, no.
But yes, you're right. Without the F word, it would have been a reasonable ad to run, I suppose. But I think also that was the one. I might have been the one where I'd photoshopped it, so a normal press pick of some sedate cornering, which they have to do. A sort of Photoshop wheel spin onto it and smoke coming off the front tyres, so it looked like it was being driven in a loutish way, which of course they're not allowed to show.
Damn them! I got a question for you actually, which I'm going to shoehorn in here, which came from Simon Woolley. So we've managed to chain questions through the various people we've interviewed from back Johnny Smith actually. Last person I interviewed was Simon Woolley, who is editor of Classic 4 magazine, and he has a question for you, and that's: what's the most ridiculous deadline you've been given, and did you make it?
What's the most ridiculous deadline I've been given? I mean, working on Top Gear was always an endless series of tight deadlines because we used to move the goalposts constantly. So I don't think I've been given a ridiculous deadline for written work, more that I have absolutely frittered away the time available until the night before and then had to stay up late to finish my homework. But my favourite deadline was when I got contacted out of the blue by the BBC Natural History Unit, and they'd been given my number as a script editor because they needed some work on a documentary, I think a 3-part documentary series about gorillas that they'd spent, usual sort of story. They spent like 2 years in the jungle filming this, beautifully shot. And they said, look, we have the script, all the facts, all the science is there. It's a little bit wordy. We want this script to breathe. We want it to be sort of much more minimal, which in itself was great because my usual voiceover work would be trying to make things fit into little gaps between music cues and bits of the presenter in vision. And it's all very tight and it's all very punchy. And this was more just that Attenborough style of thing. Attenborough, they're sort of open on a lovely shot of a rainforest. And then Attenborough's voiceover will just go, Brazil. And that's it. And he just sets the scene. It's wonderful. And it's such spacious VO work. And this was like that. And then they said, we might have Sir Patrick Stewart for it. I was like, oh my God. Well, I mean, you can write anything and it'll sound fantastic if Sir Patrick Stewart does it, which he did in the end. So that was great. But then the guy who rang me, he said, no, look, I'm really sorry to say this, but we are on a bit of a tight deadline here. And I went, oh, that's fine. That's okay. I'm used to that. No, I'm a bit busy for the rest of today and I'm a bit busy tomorrow morning, but I could definitely get onto this tomorrow afternoon. And he went, oh, no, you misunderstand me. We probably work at a little bit of a different pace at the Natural History Unit. When I said tight deadline, we kind of need this doing in the next couple of months. And I realised if you sit in a little camouflaged hide for 2 years filming gorillas, your sense of urgency is entirely different. And so it was the most lovely, leisurely job, and there were no music cues to hit. It was all just take words out, and if there are big gaps where it's just us watching the gorillas, that's what we want. It was brilliant. So that's almost my favourite deadline. Is not answering the question because it's the opposite. It was the most luxuriously, leisurely, wonderful deadline I've ever had.
But to the Natural History Museum, that was Natural History Unit. Sorry, that was a very tight deadline.
Oh, it's a rush job.
Oh, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, that was an absolute rush job. They were out of their minds with worry because it was like that's insanely fast. So I can't think of any other ones though.
I took on visions of a man in a tweed suit, just very worriedly puffing on a pipe, just having given you that news. Like, oh God, I hope you can make this deadline.
Yeah, just pacing around with a lemur on his shoulder because I imagine they're just covered in animals.
Yeah, at all times. Fetch my worry trousers. Right. I actually have a set of questions. Believe it or not, I'm almost organised, but this is very enjoyable listening to you regale stories. So I'm definitely not going to hit all of them. And I'm now trying to pick my favourite. So I'm going to ask you this: so all cars are a compromise of some sort. Have you driven cars or reviewed any cars that were just one aspect away from being brilliant? And if so, which ones? To put you on the spot.
Ooh, one aspect away from being brilliant. That's a tricky one because there's a lot of cars that are sort of fine, and that maybe if one aspect was less fine, they'd be more interesting. But I know that's a sort of perverse. That's perverse view.
Answer. I like that. That's an interesting.
But then it's weird, isn't it? Which bit would you pick? You sort of get into a Kia Ceed and you go, well, this car's really good. It's almost too good. I think if the gear change was worse, that would be better. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. And I don't think in any way a gear change getting worse makes the car better, because I always think a shoddy gear change is just taking away a moment of joy. So I was just talking to someone this week about the Venturi Atlantique. Do you remember that?
Oh, yes. One of my dream cars, believe it or not.
Oh, well, have you ever driven one?
No. That's probably why it's still one of my dream cars.
Yeah. I was saying that today to someone else about the Ford Crown Victoria, the sort of classic US cop car. There's one for sale in the UK at the moment in sort of retired Floridian pensioner spec, and I said, I've always liked those, but then I've never driven one, so that's probably why, because I suspect they're terrible. But I have a sort of that and the its kind of posh brother, the Lincoln Town car. But no, the Venturi Atlantique, I did briefly drive one of those, and it had an absolutely horrible gear change. One of those ones where you feel like something's not right. It may have been that specific car because it was so bad, and it really spoilt things. But no, I mean, to answer your question about cars that are sort of close to greatness, I suppose, isn't it? And because there's so many cars that I'm trying to think. Perversely, I'm working through cars I absolutely love and trying to think where they could be better. But I suppose you may, in fiddling with them, just slightly upset the recipe. I tell you what, I would like. Here's a good one though. A car that is absolutely probably my favourite car in the world, obviously subject to change, but at the moment is the Porsche 911 GT3 RS, the 997 shape, because they're small as well. They're smaller than what came, so there's everything. That's good. Wonderful gear change, wonderful everything, except you can't have it with back seats. And what I'd really like is, they did a touring version of the 991 GT3. I would like something that sort of melded the touring aspect, which is no wing, bit more subtle, everyday driver sort of thing. But I can't have an everyday driver that doesn't have a back seat because I've got small children. And you can't put a back seat into those GT3 Porsches, even the touring, the the shape of the floor pan at the back is different or something. I forget now. There's some reason why you simply could not put the seat out of another 911 into it. I think it might even be something arcane, like you might be able to get the seat in, but you can't mount the seat belts, the rear seat belts, so it's illegal. So that to me I was always like, but for Haper Tatar, otherwise wonderful cars. And obviously this is personal to me. A lot of people would be listening going, well, why would you want to take children with you, you moron? But it's sort of like, because I have an oldish 911 and 997. And one of the things is, I mean, I think I've taken my kids in about 4 times since I've had it, but that's not the point. There's the possibility that I can. And as they get a bit older, particularly, they won't need seats, booster seats, but their legs are still short enough to fit into the admittedly quite tight space at the back. It feels like it is you could just go, we're all going out, all 4 of us. We can still take a 911.
They count as a family car. I don't.
Yes,
have kids,
they do.
But I've had people in the back of mine, admittedly hunched over, but people fit.
Yes, yeah. I mean, you can squeeze adults back there if you really want to torture them a bit. But yeah, no. I mean, the fact it's a practical family car is one of the ways in which I sold it to my wife before I bought it. So it's always worth having that in your back pocket. But if I went and chopped it in for a GT3 RS, I think she'd go, well, what are you going to put back there then? There's a bit of floor. That's rubbish, and a roll cage as well. But yeah, there we go.
The golf carts go, darling.
Yeah, I hope that never happens to me.
No, me either. It's another thing I enjoy. Related actually would be what's your favourite little details on a car? So for me, it's a ridiculous car in and of itself, but I like the fact that on the big Rolls Royce Phantom, they have the umbrella in the door. That's kind of amazing. I think that's superb. So anything sort of like that, like a really good cup holder in something that you've come across.
Well, ironically, if you want that Rolls Royce effect on a budget, I think the Skoda Superb has that same feature.
Does it now? I did not know.
Yeah, I did. Anyway, I don't know if it still does in the latest one. I haven't checked, but yeah, it used to. Yeah. So there you go. The thinking man's Rolls Royce is the Skoda Superb. But little details. Good. I thought you were going to say the way that the Rolls Royce badge in the middle of the wheels on all those new generation Rolls Royces stays upright when they park.
Tacky.
It's mounted on. I don't know. I quite like it. I mean, they're a bit tacky generally, aren't they? It's funny because I borrowed a Wraith a while ago, and it's a good car, but because it's so expensive and because it's so beautifully done in so many ways, the bits that aren't quite right stand out more. And ultimately, I didn't enjoy it because of that. Like, there's quite a lot of wind noise around the frameless doors, and it's only because the rest of the car is so sort of uncannily quiet. But then all you can think about is the wind noise. When you're on the motorway, just going, there's noise by my ear. There shouldn't be noise by my ear because there's no noise from anywhere else. It's just things like that. And the those reverse hinged doors, I couldn't ever get the technique right, where as I went to close it, after I got out, I always managed to scuff the back of my own leg with the door. And I don't know. I think that's my failing rather than Rolls Royce's. But again, it's just one of those things where I just went, couldn't have one of these. Just couldn't have it.
Not for me. I weirdly,
but
when I went to Goodwood, so we run an event at Goodwood, and the first time I went there, they took me around the track and then up past the house on their hill climb up there, just to show me what areas they had of it. And they said, I would take you around the estate. And I came out and I was expecting to get into, I don't know, Land Rover or something. And they took me around in a Rolls Royce Phantom because that's what they got lent by the local Rolls Royce factory.
Yes.
And it's quite a nice way to be shown a venue. It's the best way I've been shown a venue so far. Other venues take note. Drive me around in a Rolls Royce and we'll take it.
I once was in a situation where, boring reasons I won't go into, I was in a Rolls Royce Phantom being driven around and then had to get into a Mercedes S-Class to be driven somewhere else. And there were 5 of us, so a real sort of, pile in. And I've never got into a Mercedes S-Class and thought, this is a bit shabby and cramped, isn't it? But the Phantom absolutely spoils you in there. Yeah, just fantastic. But little details. On that note, though, have you seen the instruments in those Rolls Royces? So they have sort of very fine needles, and they look like Well, they reminded me of, when you sort of see those, like a massively magnified picture of an old-fashioned hard drive where the little sort of reader hovers like a hair's width over the disc itself, and they sort of look like that. It looks like the needle is a micron away from the face of the dial. It's really beautifully done. There are a lot of nice details in those Rolls Royces, but what else is good? Cup holders. You can't beat those old Saab ones that do a sort of little multiple rotational thing as they come out of the dash. There's also, have you ever seen? And there's no reason why you would, because it's weird. But if you ever find yourself in the presence of a Bentley Bentayga, ask the person driving it to wash the windscreen with the headlights on, and it will trigger the headlight washers, which are those normal modern type of concealed ones. But in order to hit the headlights, they have to come out about a foot. They're incredible. It's the most unbelievable thing. Oh, that's another one. Lovely detail. And I don't know if it's on the latest one, but the old Porsche Panamera Turbo, the normal Panameras, the back spoiler just sort of flips up like it does on 911s. On the Turbo, it comes up, and then there's the top, what looks like the top surface, splits and goes laterally side to side to make the spoiler wider, so it goes up and then sort of folds out like some kind of crazy insect. It's again something. It's bizarre because most people will never get to see it. I presume it's done for entirely practical reasons, not for show. But you only ever get to see it happening if you're following one at quite high speed. So you can press a button to make it do it when it's parked, which if you ever get the chance, I would recommend, because it's somehow fascinating.
I now need to. I have a weird fascination with those cars, because when they came out, I was like, "This is ridiculous. Why would anybody want this?" And now I want one. So I'm waiting for them to come down in price.
They are. I know what you mean.
It's like, this is a stupid car. This doesn't make any sense, and I don't know whether or not I've got older or whether or not my tastes have changed to match whatever Porsche were thinking at that point. But or Porsche, depending on whether or not you pronounce it correctly. But yeah. I've become a fan of the Panamera. What do you wish cars had more of? There we go. I'm asking you these questions because you've been around a lot more cars than I have. I have a limited experience of cars. So.
What do I wish cars had more of? I don't know. Not power. Funnily enough,
no, they've got too much of it now. There's far too much power in cars now. I don't like the fact that a hot hatch that anyone can buy could outrun a Ferrari F40 most days. It upsets me.
Yeah, and if you've bought, even a hot hatch, never mind a sports car or a supercar.
Oh yeah.
If you actually bought it, it just becomes frustrating, and that means you're not getting your money's worth. You're never going to get to unleash its full performance on normal roads because it's just not possible, and it is why actually lower powered cars can be quite amusing. I mean, there's that sort of delicious feeling about acceleration is still nice, but I mean, like if you drive the latest 911, sorry to keep banging on about 911s, but they are good. But if you drive the latest 911, yeah, bloody idiots. I didn't drive one of those going, what this needs? More power. It's weird. I can't remember the last car I drove where I thought what this needs is more power. Even like, I don't know, I was, early this year, I think I was driving a Kia Picanto, and it sort of clips along all right. And I didn't at any point find myself going, come on, damn you, which, you used to do. I was looking up yesterday about I suddenly remembered that you just get hit, or maybe it's just me, I get hit by sudden brain farts of useless information, which I ended up sort of corralling into a book recently of boring car trivia. But yesterday I suddenly thought, I'm convinced that for years during the 90s, the slowest car you could buy in Britain was the Nissan Serena diesel. And I remember it having some absurdly high 0 to 60 time. So I looked this up, and I ended up consulting with a guy that I know who's a brilliant oracle of all this stuff, a guy called Keith Jones, who works for Parker's. But he has an unbelievable collection of car brochures and magazines at home. And he, bless him, went and actually checked this for me because we were debating what the correct figure was. The correct figure for the original Nissan Serena diesel, which came out in 1993, 0 to 62 in 31 seconds.
That's incredible.
I know, it's unbelievable. In the 90s,
you sort of car like that now. There's no one would buy it at all.
No
one bought the Serena.
I mean, I think people. But it would be considered dangerous, I think. People would go, you can't do that. What, someone will rear end you trying to join a motorway or something. It's like, it does seem incredibly slow. And you just don't get that anymore, that sense of, I've got a Land Rover Defender and it's slow by modern standards, but quite honestly, it's not that slow. It's still bumbles along all right, and you can whip it if you need to. And obviously, like any car that's not overburdened with power, you learn to conserve momentum and look ahead, and it's actually sort of quite good discipline. So what do I wish cars had more of? I don't know. Glass, maybe. And that's a boringly predictable sort of old farty answer, but I do sort of, you get into an old car and you suddenly go, oh my god, it's like, it's like going into, it's like you're driving a conservatory or something, but it's nice. You can see stuff. The pillars are thin, and I understand why pillars have had to get thicker. But also, glass has in many ways in many cars, it's got shallower. And I look at that again. This is terribly old farty. I feel like I'm probably turning into my dad, because my dad is a very practical man, and as I said, he was an engineer, so he sort of had a logical engineer's brain. But I would take cars that I'd borrowed back to see my dad, and he would go, I mean, there's not much room in the back, is there? And he'd be like, Dad, it's a 911, or it's a Maserati 4200 GT. It's not that you're missing the point a little bit. But I do find myself looking at something like that new Mazda 3, which is a really striking looking car, but it's got that unbelievable C-pillar at the back, which is, sort of looks like it's about 5 feet wide. And I sort of find myself going, well, how are you going to see out of that? How are you going to check your blind spot in that? And I do sort of think it's a bit more glass. You sort of sat in that and then went and sat in an Austin Maestro, and you'd go, oh my god, I feel like a goldfish in this Maestro. Yeah, exactly. It's like, or vice versa. You'd get into the Mazda and you'd be like, oh, well, I've been sent to prison for some reason. I've had my amount of daylight has been restricted.
Maybe that's the safety features. They didn't have crumple zones in old cars, but you could actually see what was about to drive into you. So it does help.
Yes, exactly. You could at least brace yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. So what else I wish I had cars have more of again? I've got another old farty answer would be buttons. I'd quite like some buttons back. I don't mind, move to touch screens per se, but bloody hell, just put heated seats and things on buttons, because when it's cold, if you've got heated seats, I want to get in and jab a massive button. Switch them on. Don't want to have to look around. Yeah.
I actually have that problem. I have a Volvo C30 as my daily driver, and I have so much trouble, even after 5 years of ownership, of making it heat the right bit of the car without staring at the central panel, because all of the buttons are the same size and shape. And if you can constantly hit the wrong ones, whereas when it used to be a big dial in the middle that you turn to red and then turn down to your feet, it kind of made sense. But now I've got to hit the right buttons in the correct order. It's like a little wizard spell for making my feet warm.
I mean, the thing is, when you write about cars for a living, you've got to be a bit careful sometimes when you sort of go, well, this is ridiculous, it doesn't work. And you're moaning about it because you've driven the car for a week and you've just got out of a different car and you're about to get into another one. And, you live this sort of privileged life where you don't ever have to actually fully immerse yourself in what a car's like day to day for more than 7 days. But it's interesting that after 5 years, you're still having that problem with the Volvo. I mean, that means that is a genuine ergonomic screw-up, which is no good.
Yeah, I mean, it's just more like just to constantly have to look at it when I'm doing it, but I don't like not looking at the road when I'm driving along, usually relatively quickly because it's quite a quick car. But, cars, ridiculous. Have you actually offended anybody with any of your Sniff Petrolness? Or actually, I suppose Top Gear did definitely offend Tesla once upon a time. But like, have you offended actual car manufacturing type people personally?
Personally, a little bit. Mostly taken in the spirit it was intended, which is, I think most people sort of understand you couldn't and wouldn't write the stuff that's on Sniff Petrol if you didn't deep down love cars and the car industry. So no, it was. I was told once that I'm going to say them again. Porsche. They apparently the UK office got some message from Germany saying, "What is this?" About some story I'd written about them, and the UK office went, "Oh, don't worry about it. It's just a joke. It's just a." And apparently the Germans sort of went, yeah." And basically it was just like the implication was, it's just you British with your stupid jokings again. And they just basically, that's thereafter they just completely ignored it. And they were like, "We thought so. We just thought we'd check. Not serious. You people are strange. Goodbye." I don't think anyone's ever got really snippy. I did it because for a while I was trying to do actual car reviews on Sniffpetrol, just because there were lots of cars that I borrowed that I wasn't kind of writing about in anywhere else. But one of the things about this job is you can borrow cars. Sometimes you borrow something because it's new and interesting, and you need to keep your hand in and know what the state of the world is out there. And so I started doing car reviews, and I did one of the Mini Paceman. You remember that, the 3-door Countryman, which. Yeah. I mean, the fact they didn't replace that when they updated the Countryman sort of tells you everything you need to know about what a failure it was. But it was also, I just thought, a really horrible car, and so I wrote a pretty snippy review about it, and didn't hear anything until I next emailed BMW to ask to borrow something else, and had to have a sort of grown-up conversation with one of their PRs. Where basically he went, "Look, there have been some questions asked here about why we're lending you cars because you say things like that about them." And I went, "So are you saying you're not going to lend me another car?" And he went, No, we would never say that. We just, but I just have to be very careful when I'm being asked questions by management about who I lend cars to. And then he did lend me a car, which was the M6 Grand Coupe, which was absolutely spectacular and I loved. So it kind of, but that was the thing. I loved it anyway. I wasn't loving it because I felt I needed to get back in their good graces. But the relationship between journalists and car companies is generally, I think, quite grown up. And I've heard these stories about sort of tech industry where you give one phone a bad review and suddenly you're no longer on their review list, and that doesn't generally happen with cars unless you can get excommunicated by certain Italian car companies, I believe. And I
that wouldn't surprise me.
But I had a weird one because I wrote a column in Evo about a certain Italian car company that's got a horse on its badge and said that they were making terrible merchandise. And rather than excommunicate me, they invited me to go to the factory to talk to them about it. Oof. But they wanted me to fly out there at my own expense and stay up at my own expense. And I just thought, I don't think I want to spend the money just to get my head kicked in, because I assumed it was a trap. So, I didn't
I'd
go.
be more worried about Italians inviting me for a factory tour.
Exactly. Now you're just going to this room here, whack. But no, the funny thing was then it turned out that I realised that I was going on holiday to Italy that August, and we weren't staying that far relatively from Maranello. I could have made a sort of 2-hour drive to go and see them. So I went, actually, do you know what? No, I am in the area, but not till August now. We are closed. And that was it. So I never. They shut down in August. So I never got to go and get my head kicked in for saying those shit. But then I think. Then I said something else. Oh yeah, I can't remember. I criticised something about Ferrari, and again they decided that the best tactic, which is a pretty strong PR move, is to kind of kill me with kindness. So I got the call, and they said, "We saw what you wrote about one of our cars a few months ago," and it was about the sat-nav, I think, in the 458, which was insanely hard to use, and I'd borrowed one. They'd lent me one of those, and I ended up driving around with a TomTom gummed to the screen, which I just thought was a really, a bit khaki in a 200 grand car or whatever. So yeah, I said the sat-nav was a bit rubbish, and then they went, "We saw what you wrote about the sat-nav. We think maybe you should borrow the new California because it has a different system with CarPlay in it." And so they lent me a California in order to try and win me over from saying their sat-nav's crap. So, which is pretty good PR, because Jag did the same. Yeah, I know it sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? It makes you such a spoilt brat. Basically, you have a bit of a tantrum about something, and they give you a biscuit. But the Jag did the same because I borrowed the current shape XF. I borrowed the sort of base model of that, and I just thought it was a really ordinary car, and I just think Jags shouldn't be ordinary. And the PR guy there went, sorry, he didn't like the XF. Tell you what, do you want an XJR? We think you'll like that more, and lent me an XJR, and I was like, this is a good tactic. I'm enjoying it because I bloody love the XJR.
To gradually sort of insult, but not too roughly, a car just to get the one up from the one you're currently driving.
Yeah, I know. That's what I said. Yeah. Do you know what? Boxster's bloody rubbish. I can have 911, please.
I like it. I've actually managed to offend car people, which we try not to do very much. But a friend of ours built a Delorean with air ride on it, and it won an award at one of our shows. I put up the thing on the website, and as you would expect, some DeLorean people were not too happy that somebody had built a DeLorean that sat on the floor. And this guy came on going, "Oh, it's a travesty." Rah, 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 rah. I was like, "Yeah, but DeLoreans are a bit crap, aren't they? It's not like it was ever
It's not
like it was ever a fast car, and it didn't handle well, and all this kind of stuff." And then he went, "Oh, it's got handling by Lotus. Lotus spent months working on this thing." And I was like, "Did they? Did they? I don't think they did. I think it's just a rubbish car. It's fine. Anybody can do it. At least it's not a Back to the Future replica." And then this guy's like, "Oh, Back to the Future, saved DeLorean, yada yada yada." And then it turns out he's the guy. Man. He's the guy that's written the book about DeLorean and was one of the designers for DeLorean.
Really?
Yeah.
Barry? Was it Barry?
Yeah.
Wills?
I think.
Was it?
Yeah. He wasn't like aggro about it, but he was like constantly defending this car, and I was just like, it's not really that good a car. I mean, it's really iconic, but and then I didn't realize I didn't know who he was, but he's quite funny.
I've read his book, or both his books. He's got another one out quite recently. About
that's
his
what
work.
he was doing at that time.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be surprised if he said you can't change the chassis, it's got handling by Lotus, because I think, the gist you get from his book about is how hard they had to work just to get the damn thing out the door because of various bits of craziness. But yeah, I can't believe that anyone would go, "Oh no, you've put air ride on a DeLorean, thereby ruining its exquisite ride and handling balance." Because I've driven a DeLorean and I do not remember them having anything close to that.
I mean, they're great to look at. But
aren't they? Yeah, I mean, I'd love to have one that had some chassis tweaks, and I mean, Johnny and I have talked about this quite a lot about an electric DeLorean. It'd be mega because the engine's horrid, so you wouldn't have any qualms about throwing that away.
No.
And then you've got something really intriguing, and it still looks like that because they do still look mega.
There's one in the States that is electric converted.
Yeah, so I hear. Again, I think Johnny told me about it. And so it's
saw that at SEMA last year, and I think my friend Nick, shout out to Nick Allen if you're out there. His plan, I know originally was not only to air ride it, but was to also make it an electric one as well. So there may be one in the UK at some point.
Cool.
Hopefully that'll come about. Should get him to lend it to you and Mr. Smith. You can drive around and talk banter.
Actually, that's talking about people we've offended. I just remembered because one of the Cars the Star episodes that I worked on was about the DeLorean, and it caused a bit of a stink amongst DeLorean enthusiasts. And there was a guy in Northern Ireland who was a TV producer, but was also a massive DeLorean fan, and he helped me a lot with introducing me to people who'd worked on the car and fans of the car who could lend us ones to drive and stuff like that. So he was really nice, but then we ultimately said it was a bit cack and it didn't fulfill its promise, and he was a bit cross about that. And then we got letters from other angry DeLorean enthusiasts as well. It was like, which really dates it, because immediately you go, "You got letters? Who the hell sends letters?" But in whenever that was, sort of 99 or something, people used to write angry letters, and we really crossed the DeLorean community because they're quite close knit and they're quite defensive, as I guess you've found out as well. Yes, yeah, they don't like anyone saying that their car was less than brilliant.
You're not a stranger to offending me, because our very first encounter with you was just after you wrote Crap Cars, and we did an interview with you on the internet.
Yes.
Because you managed to offend lots of classic and retro car people by having a bit of fun with their stupid crap cars. I think the majority of us know our cars are objectively ridiculous, but we love them. But some people didn't take it that way. But did you? You put the Beetle at number one. Surely that was known bait for people, that you'd take one of the most beloved cars in the world and stick it in prime position.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I could absolutely at the time back it up, because it's weird. I think it's a sign of getting older that I get less sort of, I don't know, angry about stuff like that. I used to really hate Beetles. And I have driven them quite a lot because, funny enough, another Cars the Star I worked on was about the Beetle, and I had to drive a lot of Beetles in the course of making it, and didn't particularly enjoy them. I sort of look at them now. I think it's hanging around with Johnny Smith a lot, because he's a massive Beatle fan, and it's almost like he's wormed his way into my head. I sort of look at Beetles now, particularly really nice sort of 50s ones, and go, well, I mean, they seem like they're quite well engineered, I suppose, and I can't summon up the bile that I once had for them. But in those days, which was 15 years ago now, because I remember what happened. I'd written that book, and I sort of had a kind of running order of, ascending crapness, ending at number one. And originally I had the Allegro at number one, and I sort of thought, that's a bit predictable. And, for the record, I do quite like Allegros. I mean, I also can explain in tedious detail why they're a bit crap, but a lot of their crapness comes from the company behind them behaving crappily and messing things up. Yeah. But I said to the publisher before I finished the book, I said, I've got this idea. How do you feel about me putting the Beetle at number one? Because I can defend that position, and I feel like it'll get more attention than just another predictable hatchet job on the Allegro. What do you think? And he just went, do it. And that was it. That was all the encouragement I needed. But of course, Beetle enthusiasts are quite passionate about their cars.
Yeah, a little bit.
I think that's also, as I've got older, I've just kind of realised, we're all essentially in the same gang. We all love cars in some way or other. And I know it's good when you disagree about which cars you consider to be great or otherwise, and that's all part of the fun of it. But we are all fundamentally car enthusiasts in some way, and so I sort of I wouldn't say I feel bad for putting the Beetle at number one. It was definitely deliberately provocative, and it kind of worked. I seem to remember one of the questions in that original interview that we did from one of Retro Ride's readers was, it's something like, it strikes me you've put the Beetle at number one as a cynical ploy to sell more books. And, I had to kind of go, yeah.
That's kind of, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, not cynical, just sort of, here's something you won't see coming. Because that was the other thing. It was just like, everyone will expect the Allegro or the Reliant Robin or something to be number one, because they always are in crap car lists. Let's do something a bit spikier that will get people talking. And it did. And, that, I don't think I've ever done any publicity, or as much publicity, or got contacted with as many requests for interviews and things ever again for any other book that I've done as with crap cars, because I don't know, it must have been a slow news week or something when it came out. I think it was kind of radio
really
and all sorts.
Early viral. It was that sort of that peak web forum type era. So before all your social media took off, and I think you just spread like wildfire through that, because also it touched on so many cars as well. That's the good thing, I guess, with list books, is everyone who wants to know whether or not their Datsun Sunny is in there or whatever. So you can I'd be wary. I am a Datsun Sunny owner, so but
it's another sign of getting old, I think, that I sort of now look at something like a Datsun Sunny, or somebody showed me some pictures the other day on Twitter of a 120Y that they're restoring. And I find myself now, where once I'd have gone, what a piece of shit, why are you wasting your time with that? Now I find myself going, they were quite well made, those, weren't they? Yeah, good. Very precise door fits. Yeah, it is. I think it's just aging. I don't know, I'm mellowing or something. But
yeah, you're losing the fire of youth.
I am. I'm losing my edge. I was saying that to another journo mate of mine the other day, because he mentioned something that I think we'd worked on together and on Evo, and I said, God, was really sort of radgy back then. I used to get really sort of up on my hind legs about stuff that these days I just couldn't be asked about. So I've lost that youthful fury about minor things. I mean, obviously, equally, I'm middle-aged now, so I get deeply furious about minor things, but it's more like, when I can't understand how to install an app on my phone now as the modern world gently slips from my grasp. But the idea that someone likes VW Beetles, I'm like, good for you. Fair play.
Well done. Well done.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're pretty much approaching time. I still have a number of questions for you, so that is shocking. I may well have to have a return visit from you if you're willing to do that, because I've enjoyed this last pretty much hour and a half of talking, and I'm hoping the people that are listening.
Oh God, sorry, I really have rambled on. I apologise to
absolutely nothing
anyone who's still with us.
I'm sure they will be, because it's been terribly entertaining. So yes, thank you for that. I will definitely have you back. So what should we be looking out for from you nowadays? Your Smith and Sniffing, which I keep on getting around the wrong way.
Yeah,
on a regular basis.
It does get mixed up. Or someone the other day wrote to me and said, I've been enjoying Smith and Smith, it's like, which somehow sounds like a sort of old-fashioned Undertaker or something. But so yes, we Johnny Smith and I are doing a weekly podcast just called Smith and Sniff, which is available on all the usual podcast places, iTunes and Google Podcasts.
Just look for number one automotive, because it's the number one automotive podcast. It's much, much more popular.
Well, I don't think we are. We keep getting battered into second place by that pesky Chris Harris and his Collecting Cars podcast.
How dare he?
I should have got the name wrong. I meant that pesky Nick Harris and his car collection podcast, so people can't search for it. But it is amazing, because we're about to. Where are we? We're hitting double figures in episode numbers, which is so we haven't been going that long. It was sort of motivated by the current situation, because we used to do videos and we can't really meet up at the moment and sit in a car together. So we decided to pivot to a podcast like everybody else, and
hello.
So we've been quite shocked. Yeah, well, more power to you, because that's the thing. I always think that it's always something old fashioned about it, isn't it? Because really, what we're making is sort of radio.
Yeah, basically, it's Radio 4.
Yeah, it is just people rambling on quite nicely against a quiet background, hopefully, and it's sort of something good and restful about it. But so we're doing that. So if you want to, when you finish listening to this podcast, listen to more of my voice, and I fully understand that you don't, but give it a break and then try Smith and Sniff. And then the other thing that I'm hawking like an absolute prostitute at the moment is I did this book called A Medium-Sized Book of Boring Car Trivia, which is just sort of 250 odd really arcane car facts that were either lodged in my head or scribbled on bits of paper, and which I've sort of collected for years, and it was just a matter of corralling them, and it was a way of kind of keeping my sanity in early lockdown by having a project to get my teeth into, and I've been really quite surprised how many people seem to like it, because I thought it was just me that sort of wanted to know 6 not interesting things about the Morris Ital, but it turns out there's a few other people out there who do as well. So that's that. If you like boring car facts, it's available exclusively through Amazon, because I did it on their self-publishing thing just to get it out there, but it is available as a paperback or an ebook, and if enough people keep buying it, I might do a follow-up, because I've already got another note in my phone full of sort of random aid memoirs, just to keep my brain ticking over. So please buy my book, please listen to my podcast. Don't worry, neither of those things will make me any money, so you're fine there, and that's about it really. I'm not doing an awful lot at the moment. Buy Evo magazine, that they do actually pay me money to write stuff for them.
This might actually be a question that has some level of weight behind it, which I'm unaware of. But is there another Grand Tour season coming? Is that a thing that's going to happen?
Well, it's a good question. There is one show on the shelf Now, the funny thing is, because I know you introduced me as the Grand Tour script editor, but the truth is I haven't done any work on the Grand Tour now for God knows how long, because we did 3 series, which was the original commission for the show, and which were the ones with the tent and all that sort of stuff that people might have seen. And then after that, we thought it would all be sort of wrapped up, that Amazon would have had enough of us. And there was a bit of a surprise when they went, well, could you do some more? And the presenters are a bit tired and they don't want to go to airports as much. So the compromise was they will do 4 feature-length specials spread over 2 years. The first of which was the one with boats that people might have seen. And those specials where they do a big road trip somewhere, they're really not scripted. There's a bit of paper that says we start here, we're going to try and go here, we'll go via here and here, and then it tends to be all a bit more loose. So there's not an awful lot for me to do. So I'm kind of Grand Tour script editor almost in title alone. I'm certainly not being paid to be Grand Tour script editor. That's the thing. So I'm working with the presenters on other stuff. Doing a bit of stuff on Jeremy's solo project for Amazon, his farming show. I'm working with Richard on a couple of things. And James, I'm not actually working with James, but he wrote the foreword for my boring car trivia book. And so, I still talk to the presenters, but Grand Tour, not really doing anything. So there is one on the shelf. I mean, I know that. I'm still in touch with everyone and everything, but not actually doing any work with them because there is no work to do in my particular line. So the next one, I don't know when it's due to go out, but then they were just about to go off and shoot the next one when all the COVID-19 stuff kicks off, and that was all cancelled. And with travel sort of internationally being pretty likely to be on pause for a while, there's going to have to be a bit of a rethink on. It's hard to do a sort of globe travelling series when you can't travel the globe, but. Yeah. I used to always point out that we shouldn't be fearful of shooting stuff in the UK when we were making the original series, just because for an international audience, Britain is exotic and abroad.
Yes, very much so.
So because there was a period, I think Jeremy was worried. He was like, "We're doing too many things in the UK," and I was like, "Yeah, but if you live in Boise, Idaho, that's quite interesting, isn't it? You've never been to Scotland, perhaps, and you'd like to see it on your telly, so that's fine." Although conversely, I used to work on the US version of Top Gear, and the channel that it went out on, which was the History Channel, strangely, they always used to try and stop us leaving the US. Not literally, but when we pitched things, we had this wonderful idea where they went to France and tried to sell the French on American cars, and it was basically Rutledge and Tanner and Adam roaring around French countryside in like some absurd 1975 Cadillac DeVille, and the network went, our audience doesn't want to see abroad. They don't want to see France. And we went, what? The audience is always watching documentaries about Nazis. They're abroad. No, they don't want to see this. They made us film pretty much in the US. They were even resistant about going to Alaska because they thought it seemed too far from the main part of the US.
Their audience is Ron Swanson. That is insane.
It is a little bit like that, but I think broadly an audience around the world, which is what the Grand Tour has, would be okay with seeing bits of Britain that they have never been to or experienced. So, yeah, there may be a bit of reworking on that score, but at the moment everything's paused. I mean, the office is pretty shut down, and it's it's the same story with most of telly, to be honest. So that's not unusual.
No, it's going to be an interesting autumn schedule when everything that was supposed to be filmed now is not. Yes.
Yeah, I hope you like repeats and lots of people talking to laptop cameras in front of bookshelves, because that is the autumn schedule at the moment.
Yay!
And podcasts. There's more reason to listen to podcasts.
Yes, listen to these podcasts. Right, well, that is us. That is our time. Join us next time. I am not sure who we have. It should, I think, in theory, be Mike Burrows from the website StanceWorks and of building interesting cars fame. But that depends on whether or not I can get a line to California sorted. Thank you very much for your time, and see you soon.